session. By the way, all of these sessions are available to you online. You wake up in the middle of the night, you can't sleep, you want to put a little Rabbi Feinstein on, better than melatonin, better than Ambien, better than Trazodone. I can put you to sleep. So what you do is you go to the Valley Beth Shalom website, vbs.org. At the top, there's a bar. It says live stream. Click on that. A menu comes down. You look at it. It says archive about halfway down the page. Click on archive. Go way down that. You'll see our class. Israel yesterday, today, and tomorrow. All of the classes we did are online. You can watch them. Okay? The second session, we invited my dear friend, Professor Steve Windmuller, who's the former dean of the HUC campus of Hebrew Union College. And Steve gave us a really very interesting and insightful insight into what this crisis has done to us, where it puts us, and how we are changing through this crisis. That is the American community, the American Jewish community. The third session was my friend Donnie Mossing. Donnie is an Israeli performer, musician, and a teacher. Music of this moment, and the music that's being produced and sung in Israel at this moment. And the last week's session was my dear friend, Professor Dr. Rachel Korazim, who is a professor of Israeli literature, who talked to us about some of the poetry that's being written through this crisis. The reason for this, of course, is because we can read about the politics in the New York Times, and we can read about the politics in Haaretz and Jerusalem Post and Times of Israel. We can read about the politics, but it's very difficult to access the heart of a country through those kinds of headlines. And so I thought it was very important to hear the music, read the poetry, and talk about how the country is experiencing this catastrophe. I have a theory about American Jews in Israel. American Jews are very pro-Israel, very violently pro-Israel, sometimes too violently pro-Israel. But they don't know a lot about Israel because they don't read Hebrew, and we, American Jews, often don't have access to the expressions of the real heart of Israel. And so I think that's very important to know, to listen to its music, to watch its film and TV, to experience what goes on in the heart of Israel. And that is part of what those last two sessions are. And tonight I want to go back to where I started and talk a little bit about history and why this particular crisis disturbs us in the way that it does. That's what tonight's session is going to be about. And we'll have a chance to do a little bit of reading together, a little bit of learning together, with some chance for questions and answers. I am not an expert on the geopolitics of Middle Eastern countries. I'll do my best. If I don't know an answer, I'll make one up just for you. But what I do want to say at the very outset is I said at the very beginning of our conversation, all of us come into this room with attitudes, with assumptions, and with previous experiences. And we all have perspectives on this stuff. And because this stuff is so dear to us, because it hurts so much, because it cuts deeply to the flesh, many of us have very deep emotional responses to these things, even to words. Even to words. I've gotten yelled at by members of the synagogue because I use certain words in conversation that I thought were innocuous and they thought they were trigger words. I'm not here to make anybody angry. You may agree with what I'm going to say and may disagree. You may agree with the people we're going to read and may disagree. But for the moment, I'm going to ask you to to take this in. The purpose of meeting ideas we don't agree with is because that helps us grow. That helps us learn. That's the definition of education. If I said stuff that you already knew, you could have stayed home and watched television. You didn't need to come tonight. We're going to encounter ideas and ways of looking at things and values and personalities that are different from the ones we walked in with. We can interrogate them. We can ask questions. We can even challenge them. Not me, but them, right? But let's be good about this. We're all in this together. So here's what I'd like to do tonight. I'd like you to step into a time machine with me. And I want to take you to the end of the 19th century, a little more than 100 years ago. You are a Jew living at the end of the 19th century, 1890, 1895. When you look out at the world, what do you think? What do you see? What do you hope for? And what do you fear? Well, it depends on where you live. There are three principal centers of Jewish population in 1890. The vast majority of Jews in the world, believe it or not, live in the East. They live in North Africa under Arab Muslim rule. They live in the East, in Iraq, in Iran, in Yemen. And those Jews have been in those countries under Muslim rule for a long time. Some of them for 2,000 years, some of them at least since 1492 when we left Spain. Those Jews, those of us who lived in Iraq, in Iran, in Morocco, in Yemen, in Egypt, in Tunisia, Libya, those Jews live in a sort of tense, tolerated state among the Muslims. The Muslims protected the Jewish minority, and in many cases, Muslim rulers cherished having the Jews there, but it was a tense tolerance. Jews are a protected minority under Islam, but not under all Islam. And occasionally what would happen is you would have rise of radical forms of Islam, which would then sweep across Jewish communities. In 1839, the Jews of Mashhad, the Mashhadi Jews of Iran, were forced to convert to Islam by the sword. In 1840, the Jews of Damascus were accused of killing a monk and using his blood to make matzah. This time of year, by the way, is pogrom season in the East and in Europe. Easter, the death of the God and resurrection, is the time when Christian and other groups decided was a good time to go and maraud. In 1864, 500 Jews are killed in Marrakesh and Fez. In 1897, Jews are murdered and synagogues ransacked in Tripoli. What do Jews in those communities do? They are traditional Jews. They have no political power whatsoever. And I don't mean this pejoratively. They don't have a political imagination because they're deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. Because they're living in small communities, in towns and villages, in some cases in cities, but in isolated areas in cities, and they accept the great Jewish narrative. Our job is to live piously, pray fervently, and wait for God's Messiah to redeem us. And so despite these momentary, these fluctuations of Islamic attitudes, despite these moments of riot and ransacking and marauding, Jews in the East stay put until 1948. When the rise of Israel happens, life in the East becomes intolerable, and there is a huge aliyah, a huge immigration of Mizrahi Jews to Israel and elsewhere. If anyone ever watched the movie Salah Shabati, this is the first great funny movie in Israel. If you never saw the movie, go find it. It's online somewhere. Chaim Topol, his first big movie role, a script written by Ephraim Kishon, the great humorist. Funny. If you know Israel, it's a very funny movie. Salah, S-A-L-A-H, Shabati. That's his name. He's an immigrant dealing with the prejudice and other issues of living in Israel in the 1950s. Great movie. Jews in Iran have a different sort of path. Jews in Iran enter the cities and begin to get educated in certain cases. Some come into the cities, some stay in villages, but they stay in Iran protected by the Shah's government until 1979. When they all pack up and move to Beverly Hills. A serious blessing to us all. A serious blessing to us all. Revive this community, revive our communities. That's Eastern Jews. The next big community of Jews lives in Eastern Europe. How many of you come from Eastern European roots? Take a look around. That's an important fact. Okay? About 3.5, 4 million Jews live in Eastern Poland, Western Russia, and Ukraine. It's a section ruled by the Tsar called the Pale, P-A-L-E, of settlement. In the 1880s comes Tsar Alexander II. He's a good guy. He brings reforms. He liberates the serfs, opens up Russian society, and allows Jews to leave the Pale and enter cities. Jews move into Moscow and St. Petersburg. Jews are allowed to attend Russian schools, technical schools, high schools, and even universities. Jews are living well until, in 1881, Tsar Alexander is assassinated by a group of anarchists, among whom there are some Jews. Not all of them, just a few, but enough to make this a cause. So when Tsar Alexander dies, his brother becomes Tsar Alexander III, his son rather, and Tsar Alexander III decides, at the advice of his Minister of the Interior, to introduce a program to decimate the Jewish population of Russia. Very simple. Kill a third, convert a third, and get a third to leave. That's why you're here. My grandfather was drafted into the Russian army at the age of 9. His folks put him on, he was an orphan, so his aunt and uncle put him on a boat and sent him to New York City. Keep him out of the Russian army. Life became miserable. From 1881 until the outbreak of the First World War, 1914, and then the Russian Revolution in 1917, there are 1,200 pogroms in Eastern Europe. What is a pogrom? It is a state-sponsored, state-mandated, state-supported riot to kill Jews. The pogroms begin in those times when the word was invented. Life becomes unbearable. It was already terrible poverty. But now, with the advent of the pogroms, life becomes miserable. Life is miserable for Eastern European Jews. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Take a moment. The first source on your sheet is a source from a man named Israel Yosef Benjamin, who in the middle of the 19th century took a trip to the East. He's a Romanian Jew. He's a merchant. And he's a Romanian Jew, and he's doing trade with the East. And he goes to the East, and he visits the Persian community, and he writes this in his travel log. He wrote a book of travel logs. He writes, Persian Jews are obliged to live in separate part of town. They are considered unclean creatures. Under the pretext of being unclean, they're treated with the greatest severity, and should they enter a street inhabited by Muslims, they're pelted by the boys and mobs with stone and dirt. And he goes on at what a miserable life Persian Jews had in the middle of the 19th century. The pogroms of Russia, 1,200 of them, the most famous of which, not the most destructive, but the most famous of which is the first one that took place in the 20th century in the Moldavian city of Kishinev. It was a brutal attack, not the worst, by the way. There were much bigger ones elsewhere. But this one got the notice of many, many important people. The New York Times sent a reporter. This is the story from the New York Times, April 28th, 1903. The anti-Jewish riots in Kishinev, Bessarabia, are worse than the censor will permit to publish. This is an interesting phrase, right? I can tell you things, but there's things I'm not allowed to tell you. There was a well-laid-out plan for the general massacre of Jews on the day following Russian Easter. The mob was led by a priest, and the general cry, "Kill the Jew," was taken up all over the city. The Jews were taken wholly unaware and were slaughtered like sheep. The dead numbered 120, and the injured about 500. The scenes of horror attending this massacre are beyond description. Babies literally torn to pieces by the frenzied and bloodthirsty mob. The local police made no attempt to check the reign of terror. At sunset, the streets were piled with corpses and wounded. Those who could make their escape fled in terror, and the city is now practically deserted of Jews. That was representative of what was going on all over Eastern Europe, all over the Pale of Settlement. Poland, Russia, Ukraine, in those years following the assassination of the Tsar. You're a Jew who lives there. What are you going to do? Hold that thought. Hold that thought just a minute, okay? The third population center is Western Europe. You're a Jew who lives in Western Europe. 100 years before, in the 1790s, Jews in Western Europe began to experience emancipation. The laws that separated them from the Christian population were removed. A wave of liberalism, translation, a political philosophy. It doesn't mean you're for a welfare state. That's an American version of it. Liberalism is a political philosophy which says you are a citizen of the state, you are a human being, and you are entitled to human rights. We are all equal before the law. We are all citizens of the state, and the state governs all of us equally. That's liberalism. Liberalism flows through Europe, starts in, actually America, moves across the ocean to England, then France, then Central Europe, Russia, Germany, what was then the Czech Republic, Italy. Jews, under that theory, are emancipated. You're no longer kept in a ghetto. You no longer have to wear special garb. You are no longer excluded from schools and universities. You are no longer excluded from businesses, guilds, and vocations. You are no longer required to identify yourself to the authorities. You are a citizen of the empire, of whatever empire you're in, of France, of Austria, of Hungary, of Italy, of Germany. You are a citizen like everyone else, and Jews took advantage of this. They left the ghettos, the isolated, walled-in neighborhoods, took off the garb of Jews, stopped speaking Yiddish, learned French, German, Italian, moved into nicer neighborhoods, and by 1890, you live in Leopoldstadt, a really nice neighborhood in Vienna. And you own a business, and you employ non-Jews. Imagine that. And your daughter is married to a non-Jew. And your son is in university, and he joined a fraternity. That's a non-Jewish fraternity. And this is who you are. If you want to read this story, the great playwright Tom Stoppard wrote a play that won a Tony Award about 3 years ago called Leopoldstadt. It was here in LA for a while. You saw it? New York? Extraordinary. You can read it. It's easy to get online. You can get it on Amazon. It's worth reading. It's the story of one Viennese family, 3 points in their history. 1890, 1920, and then 1955. And see what happens. The first scene opens up in the salon of this beautiful apartment in Leopoldstadt. There's a Christmas tree in the corner. And the family's talking about life here. And there are Jews and non-Jews mixing. It's a wonderful picture. He does a beautiful job of picturing who we were in 1890, and then who we were in 1920, 1930, and then who we were in 1955. You are emancipated. You're a European. You dress European. You speak European. You go to the opera. You go to the theater. You eat in fine cafes and restaurants. You read the newspaper. You're engaged in politics. You're university educated. You're a capitalist making a nice living. Everything is great. Except it's not. Because even though you were told by the authorities, even though you were told that you are an equal, you're not always an equal. You're not always an equal. There are clubs that won't have you. There are businesses you can't enter. There are places you can't be you. And the politicians seem to have this knack for calling on populist anti-Semitism whenever they're trying to rally support. So what do you do as a response? You dig deeper into your Europeanness. You speak better German than the Germans. You know more opera than the Viennese. You're more Italian than the Italians. You make a big show of how much you contribute to the community at large, trying to show that you belong. All along, noticing that they seem to still see you as the Jew. There's a tension there. And as time goes on, those political themes, the guy who runs for mayor of Vienna runs on a viciously anti-Semitic platform, gets a lot of support. So you say to yourself, what do you say to yourself? It's just rhetoric. It's just politics. It doesn't mean anything. That's how politicians talk. At the same time, there is this feeling in the pit of your belly of, think this is good? You think we should stay? What's the worst thing that could happen? Take a look at the second page. Max Nordau was the most recognized psychiatrist in all of Europe and a great European intellectual. The story is that when Theodor Herzl wrote his book, The Jewish State, and declared that Jews need to have their own country, he sent the manuscript to Vienna to be published in the newspaper, the Vienna Free Press, which was this Jewish liberal newspaper. Jews have their own state? You're insane. Go see Nordau. And they booked him an appointment to go see Nordau. Story is he went to Nordau, laid down on Nordau's couch, and for 3 sessions spilled out his guts to Nordau. On the 3rd session, Nordau said, Dr. Herzl, if you're crazy, I'm crazy. Sit up, let's talk. When Herzl called the First Zionist Congress in 1897, Nordau, who was much more famous than Herzl, was the keynote speaker. This is what he wrote. The Western Jew has bread, but man does not live on bread alone. The life of the Western Jew is no longer in danger through the enmity of the mob, but bodily wounds are not the only wounds that cause pain, and from which one may bleed to death. The Western Jew meant emancipation to be real liberation, and hastened to draw the final conclusions thereof. But the nations made him fear that he erred in being so heedlessly logical. Those magnanimous laws magnanimously laid down the theory of equality of rights, but governments and society exercised the practice of equality of rights in a manner which rends it, well, mockery. The Jew says naively, I am a human being. I regard nothing human as alien. And the answer he meets is, shh, not so loud, softly. Your rights as a man must be enjoyed cautiously. You lack the right notion of honor, feeling for duty, morality, patriotism, idealism. So what does Dr. Nordau say? Dr. Nordau puts all of Western European Jewry on his couch. And he says, emancipation has totally changed the nature of the Jew and made him into another human being. See, in the ghetto, when we were isolated, speaking our own language, wearing different clothing, engaging in different business, staying among our own, in the ghetto, the Jew had his own world. It was to him the sure refuge, which he had for him the spiritual and moral value of a parental home. Here were associates by whom he wished to be valued and could be valued. Here was the public opinion to be acknowledged, by which was the aim of the Jew's ambition. What mattered if outside the ghetto he was despised, that which was within it praised? So did the ghetto Jew live in moral respect a real full life. But the emancipated Jew, he's talking about himself. This is Nordau talking about himself and his people, upper class European Jews. The emancipated Jew is insecure in his relation with his fellow beings, timid with strangers, suspicious even toward the secret feelings of his friends. His best powers are exhausted in the suppression, or at least the difficult concealment, of his real character. For he fears that this character might be recognized as Jewish. Remember that? Felix Mendelssohn writes all this beautiful music. Felix Mendelssohn, who was baptized. Felix Mendelssohn, who didn't identify as a Jew. Felix Mendelssohn, but when Wagner comes along, he says this is Jewish music and refuses to have it played anywhere, right? He's a Jew, and he has never the satisfaction of showing himself as he really is in his thoughts and his sentiments. He becomes an inner cripple, externally unreal, and thereby always ridiculous and hateful to all higher feelings men as everything that is unreal. These new Marranos, remember what Marranos are? They're the Spanish Jews who hid their Jewishness. That's what we all are, said Nordau. Leave Judaism with rage and bitterness. But in their innermost hearts, although not acknowledged by themselves, he's a psychiatrist after all, they carry with them their own humiliation, their own dishonesty, and hatred toward Christianity, which has forced them to lie. Right? Anyone know my friend Herschel Fox? Herschel has 100 jokes about this, right? The guy who spent 25 years trying to join the Christian Country Club, and finally, after all his efforts, they let him join the country club, and they offer him a chance to make an initiation speech, and he stands in front of the country club and he says, "My fellow goyim." You know that joke, right? You knew that joke, right? Right? Or the guy, the computer, or the Federation's computer kicks out a name, and the two chief solicitors go up to the mansion, to the richest guy in town. The butler shows them in. They sit down in the library. Comes in the gentleman of the house, smoking jacket, ascot, snifter of brandy, and he says, "Gentlemen, I'm very sorry to tell you, but I, Throckmorton Montgomery IV, am not of the Jewish faith. I so respect your people and your ethics, and I'm happy to make a small contribution to your cause, but you simply have a mistake. I am not in any way of the Jewish faith, as you can plainly see." They say, "Listen, our computer never makes a mistake," right? He said, "I'm sorry, I know my ancestry back 100 generations, back to William the Conqueror, and I assure you that I am not of the Jewish faith. I, Throckmorton Montgomery IV, am simply an Episcopalian and not of the Jewish faith, and so was my father, Alav Shalom, Throckmorton Montgomery III. I mean, this idea that you try with it, he was trained by Freud. So the notion of repression, which means you try with all your heart to hide something, and yet it's always going to slip out. That's his diagnosis of the psychological torture of the Western European Jew in 1890. And if you read Leopoldstadt, watch Leopoldstadt by Tom Stoppard, you'll see this played out. Okay, folks, you're a Jew in Iraq. You're a Jew in the Pale of Settlement in Russia, Poland. You're a Jew in Vienna in the year 1890. One night, you lie in bed looking up at the ceiling, asking yourself, what am I supposed to do? How shall I live? If you're the Jew in Iraq, you say, I simply have to pray harder, perform mitzvahs more carefully, listen to the rabbi, and maybe this will be the generation God sends redemption. If you're the Jew in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, you have four choices. You have four choices ahead of you. Choice number one, stay. Why would the Eastern European Jew want to stay? There's pogroms, there's poverty, there's disease, there's terror. Why would he want to stay and not leave? First of all, leaving is expensive and you don't have any money. Second of all, where are you going to go? Third of all, your rabbi has told you that America is a wasteland, and this is the place where Jews need to be. The name of the country was Poland, but they made a joke in Hebrew. It was Polan. Stay here in Hebrew. Stay here. Your rabbi says stay here. Anyone ever see the great cinematic classic, The Frisco Kid? Who got sent to America? Not the great students of the rabbis. They stayed in the rich, warm Jewish environment of Eastern Europe. It was the kid at the end of the bench, the screw-up, who got sent to America. I know. Your great-grandfather was a very pious rabbi. Only very pious rabbis came to America in the 1880s to the 1920s. All the horse thieves, card sharks, handlers, used car salesmen stayed in. Come on, guys. Who do you think came here? The very pious stayed in Eastern Europe because they had their God and their faith. And they were prepared to withstand the pogroms, the poverty, the disease, and the problems. So you stay because your rabbi said to stay. How about in Western Europe? Do you stay or do you go? What's the case for staying in Western Europe? I have money. I have a beautiful apartment. I own a factory. My kids are in school. Yeah, the politicians are talking anti-Semitism, but that's just political talk. They'll never do anything. You have learned to trust the institutions of democratic liberalism. And you believe that the institutions of democratic liberalism will protect you from what Jews were running from for 2,300 years. So you stay. So you stay. The second thing you could do, fight to change the society. The Mizrahi Jews are never going to change anything. They have no political power. In Eastern Europe, anyone remember Fiddler on the Roof? The second daughter, Huddle, marries Perchik, the revolutionary. Bolshevism. What did Bolshevism, communism, socialism, anarchism, what did they promise? Classless society. The end of prejudice. They said all of this anti-Semitism is simply an extension of the bourgeois project. Once we tear down the bourgeoisie, turn over the means of production to the working class, once we become the classless society of the workers, we will all be free. Trotsky was a Jew. Marx was a Jew. They didn't admit it, but he was. Many of them were Jews. They believed they could bring Jewish ideals of messianic change to European societies. You join a revolutionary movement. Same in the West. You join a revolutionary movement. That's a second option. Here's a third option. Run. Where are you going to go? Well, you had a couple of options. There were little countries, Costa Rica, Panama, Cuba, but there really were only two real options. One was a major option and one was a minor option. The major option was America. Why would you come to America? Because you have a cousin in Chicago. Why would you come to America? First of all, it wasn't easy to get to America. You understand, you got to get to a port, you got to get on a ship. It's a miserable, miserable trip. Look, hell, it's a miserable trip now in business class, but you imagine what it's like to be 10 days on a ship in the hold of the ship. And the problems are, what do you do? What do you do with your older parents? Can they travel with you? What do you do with your sister who has eye problems and you know that she won't be let into America? What do you do? What do you do? But you get on a boat and you come to America. Why do you come to America? Because America has a promise. What's the promise of America? Well, thankfully it was put in really good language by the guy who started it. Look on the second page. There's a Hebrew congregation that was started in the 17th century in Newport, Rhode Island, which was a port city that later became a resort city. And the shul in Newport, Rhode Island, which I believe is the oldest synagogue in North America, right? In North America, the shul in Newport, Rhode Island, when George Washington is inaugurated president, they do what Jewish communities always did when a new king is crowned. They wrote him this flowery letter expressing their allegiance to his regime. He writes them back something very, very sensitive. Listen to him. Listen to him. This is George Washington, 1790. It's a long letter. This is the second and third paragraph of the letter. First he says, I really appreciate what you wrote. But really, guys, it's over the top. Okay? However you say that in Virginian. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy. That's that liberalism again. A policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and the immunities of citizenship. What's the important word in that sentence? Say it again. All. All. It is now no more than toleration is spoken of, as if it were the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoy the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. I want you to read this sentence again. Very important. It's now no more that toleration is spoken of. You ask me for tolerance? You ask me for toleration? What does Washington say back to them? Toleration is the expression of a powerful majority which is prepared to indulge a minority trying to get in. A minority who has lesser rights, lesser dignity, lesser position, lesser place in this country. That's what tolerance is. I tolerate having you here. Washington says that doesn't apply to America. Why doesn't it apply to America? Because you're citizens. You are no less citizens than I am. We are all equal here. We left behind all of that stuff in Europe. That's why we just fought the war we just fought. That's why we just bled and died for this. Because you're no less citizens than I am. In other words, Jews, for the first time in 2,000 years of Jewish diaspora, you belong here. You're not just living here. You're not just here temporarily. You're not just indulged to be here. You belong to this place. And even more, this place belongs to you. What did we invent in America? We invented something in America which was revolutionary in history of the world. The hyphen. The hyphen. You go to Ireland, you are Irish. If you're not Irish, you're something else. You go to Germany, you're German. You go to Italy, you're Italian. You go to Czech Republic, you are Czech. You go to Russian, you are Russian. In America, you're an Irish American. What the hell is an Irish American? That concept had never penetrated the mind of European civilizations. You're a nation. You have an identity. No, not in America. America is made up of many nations with many identities that have gathered together to share life together. And all we ask, as Washington says, right? All we ask is they live under the protection, should demean themselves, should behave themselves as good citizens and giving it on all occasions their effectual support. It would be inconsistent with the frankness of my character not to avow that I am pleased with your favorable opinion of my administration. I'm enough of an honest man to tell you I enjoy the flattery and fervent wishes for my felicity. Oh, by the way, political leaders once knew how to write. Does this impress anybody? This is not a tweet with caps. This is a beautifully written letter of ink with vocabulary way above Mad Magazine, you know? I just want to point that out. I'm not making comments on anybody. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of all the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree. In other words, he's read the Bible. And there shall be none to make him afraid. That's a quotation from Isaiah. May the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our path, and make us all in our several vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way everlasting happy. Washington says something remarkable to the Jews. America's different. In America, you're not tolerated. In America, you're part of this place. You're here. You're here. You belong. You are a Jewish American, an American Jew. Put the hyphen wherever you want. And that's all we ask for. We don't want you to stop being Jews to be Americans. In fact, on the contrary, what America thrives on is that its national communities pursue their national cultures and share them. And the best example of that, the best advocate of that, was a Jewish fellow who didn't express himself as a Jew until he was 56 years old, and his name was Louis Brandeis. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky. Nicht a Jewish ghetto, Epis. Went to Harvard at age 16, graduated at age 19. This brightest kid in his class. He was Oliver Wendell Holmes' favorite student, right? And then by Woodrow Wilson, gets put on the Supreme Court. I think he's the first Jew on the Supreme Court, right? And then age 56, he has a conversion. I mean, he's Jewish. He's born Jewish, but it wasn't part of his being. But in age 56, Zionism catches him. And so someone asks him this question. You're this great, most visible American Zionist. How can you be an American Zionist? Zionism says Jews are a people and deserve their own homeland. How can you be an American Zionist? So he writes this, 1915. Let no American imagine that Zionism is inconsistent with patriotism. I like the idea, by the way, that you capitalize certain words. That I do think is good. Multiple loyalties are objectionable only if they are inconsistent. A man, pardon the sexist language, a man is a better citizen of the United States for being also a citizen of his state and of his city, for being loyal to his family and to his profession or trade, and for being loyal to his college or his lodge. Every Irish American who contributed to advancing home rule in Ireland was a better man and a better American for the sacrifice he made. Every American Jew who aids in advancing the Jewish settlement of Palestine, though he feels neither he nor his descendants will ever live there, will likewise be a better man and a better American for doing so. Turn the page. There is no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to Jewry. The Jewish spirit, the product of our religion and experiences, is essentially modern and essentially American. Essentially American, right? What's the great American holiday? Thanksgiving. It was modeled after Sukkot, right? We sit down to a ritual meal. You all do this, right? Turkey, stuffing, cornbread, mashed sweet potatoes with marshmallows on top, green beans with those crunchy onions on top, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. You have to have these things on the table. You don't have these things on the table, it's treif, right? And then you take up the Haggadah and you tell the story. You know the story, right? In 1620, our pilgrim ancestors, facing tyranny in England, got on a tiny little boat and crossed the mighty Atlantic. And when they arrived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, it was a very forbidding place, still is. But they were helped by the natives to survive the terrible winter in Massachusetts. And the next year, they invited the natives to have a Seder together and told the story of how God had given them providence. And so every year we gather on the fourth Thursday of November to watch football, argue with our families, and eat turkey, and give thanks to Providence for the bounty and gifts of this beautiful American continent. And let us say, you all may use a different nusach because you may be Sephardic, but that's the Haggadah. Anybody recognize that story? We faced tyranny. We took a very treacherous journey to get away. We came to a promised land. Providence benefited us and blessed us with this promised land. And so we gather every year for a ritual meal with ritual foods to recite that story to our children in the first person. 1620, my ancestors were freezing in Lithuania. They were not in Plymouth Rock, Plymouth, Massachusetts. And if by some strange, weird teleportation they had shown up in Plymouth, those people would probably not let them in because they weren't particularly tolerant, like Washington. But that doesn't matter. I'm an American. I tell that story in the first person. Why? Because that's the American story. It's also the Jewish story. It's also the Jewish story, right? As one scholar once pointed out, it's a good thing they chose a turkey. Had they chosen a ham, we'd have been screwed. But the idea is that story of tyranny, escape, freedom, providence, with a meal to celebrate it, is a Jewish thing. So Brandeis says to be loyal to the Jewish tradition and its experiences is essentially modern and essentially Jewish. In its essence, it is American, or the other way around. Not since the destruction of the temple have Jews in spirit and ideals been so fully in harmony with the noblest aspirations of the country in which they lived. Indeed, loyalty, listen to this, indeed, loyalty to America demands that each American Jew become a Zionist. For only through the ennobling efforts of its striving can we develop the best that is in us and give to this country the full benefits of our great inheritance. That's American liberalism, right? Each of us brings our national cultural traditions to this country and shares it with everybody else. And the more loyal we are to our national cultures and bring it to everybody else, the richer and more powerful America becomes. That's Brandeis. That's American liberalism. That was the promise that drew your ancestors and my ancestors out of the ghettos of Eastern Europe, across that ocean, through Ellis Island, and here to Beverly Hills, or Encino. Haven't made it to Beverly Hills, but maybe one day God will see his way there. Right? 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 Western Jews, Western European Jews, also drawn, but not in nearly the same numbers, because they were so wealthy, because they were so settled, and because they saw the signs of liberalism around them in Vienna and Berlin, in Milan, in Frankfurt. They saw that liberalism living out there. They didn't need to go to America to get it. Russian Jews had no idea that you could be accepted as a citizen. In Vienna, you felt like you were a citizen. So most of them stayed. 2.5 million Russian Jews, us, came to America and settled here. There's a fourth option. You could stay, you could change, you could run to America, and there's a fourth option. And what's the fourth option? Palestine, Israel. Why was that inviting? Why was that forbidding? It was inviting because it would get you out of Europe. It was inviting because that's God's promised land. It was inviting because beginning in the 1880s, there were small groups of pioneers, mostly young radicals. A young yeshiva bocher named David Gruen goes to Palestine, changes his name to David Ben-Gurion. Spends 2 weeks working on farms, because he was a labor Zionist, and then decides he's much better in committees than on farms. And so he becomes the chairman of the Yeshuv. That's Zionism. For just a moment, though, what was the problem with Zionism? What was the problem with going to Palestine? Malaria. It was a wasteland. It was swamps. It was poverty-stricken. It had no culture. I mean, you came to America, there was an opera in New York. There was nothing there. Like, mamish, nothing. Nothing. And it was dangerous. There were hostile Arab populations, marauders all over the place. You lived under Ottoman law, whatever the hell that is. And you had grown up speaking Yiddish. And in Palestine, they frowned on that. They wanted you to speak this other new language called Hebrew, which was a little weird. But what drew you to Palestine? What might have drawn a young pioneer? A young David Ben-Gurion, a young Gershon Scholem from Berlin, a young Martin Buber from Berlin. What drew them to Palestine? Listen to Ben-Gurion. In every country where they are allowed to do so, Jews create their own voluntary framework and organizations for Jewish activities and self-expression. But it is my point that such a framework cannot be all-encompassing, comprehensive in scope, or vital in content. Only in sovereign Israel is there the full opportunity for molding the life of the Jewish people according to its own needs and values, faithful to its character and spirit, to its heritage of the past, and its vision of the future. In Israel, the barrier between being the Jew and the individual as a person has been abolished. One can be a complete person and a complete Jew, for the prevailing environment is one created by Jews. Our life in Israel has become, once again, as in biblical days, a complete and comprehensive experience comprising within a state framework that is Jewish all the living values of the individual and the nation. You can live a complete Jewish life in Israel in a way that you can't anywhere else, even in America, which is so wonderfully welcoming. Because in America, you still have to speak English. You still have to put up with American values and American customs, right? My kids came to me and said, Abba, we're so upset. Why are you so upset? He says, everywhere you look, it's Christmas, Christmas, Christmas. Where's Hanukkah? I said, kids, America's 98% Christian. Like, we're a very small group here. He said, no. Everyone we know is Jewish. So yeah, you live in Encino. Everyone you know is Jewish, right? I mean, Mamish didn't understand it, but that's the point. Right? In Israel, the Jews are a nation like all other nations. At the same time, they are Jews in every fiber of their body and every feeling of their heart, whether they be religious or not, as no Jew can possibly attain abroad. This is the product of the special revolution that's been taking place in the land of Israel the last 3 generations, reaching its peak in the establishment of the state. This was more than a revolution involving a change of regime. Here's the line I want you to read. It involved a personal revolution of every individual Jew who came to the land. A revolution in his way of life, vocation, language, status, and all that is meant by the Hebrew term ge'ulah, which means redemption. There's no parallel in any other language but to which redemption comes nearest. Why do you want to come to Palestine? With all of its challenges, with all of its difficulties, with all of its hostility, with all of its poverty, with all of its problems, you want there because there's a possibility of living a Jewish life like no other place in the world. A full and complete Jewish life. Those of you who have been to Israel know these little joys of living in Israel. The supermarket lady who wishes you Shabbat Shalom when she bags your groceries. Or the news guy on the news who finishes the news and says, Erev Tov Shabbat Shalom. And you say, ooh, that's cool. Right? Sufganiyot on every corner at Hanukkah time. Kids in masks at Purim time. There's something, I mean, when I was a kid, the coolest thing to own in the world was a Coca-Cola bottle where the words Coca-Cola were written in Hebrew. It looked like the English. They copied the logo. But for an American Jewish kid, this was like I smuggled it home in my bag so I could show my friends when I went as a teenager. Look what I got. This is Israel. I mean, there's something about that. For those of us, even those of us who lived very, very rich Jewish lives here, there's something, that extra dimension that is lived there. That's what he's talking about. That's what draws you. So you have 4 choices. Stay where you are and pray for the Messiah. Hope that liberalism holds out. Join the Bolsheviks and try to change the world until they turned on us. Leave for America and its promise of liberalism and acceptance, freedom and security. It's welcome. Or leave to Palestine, Israel, and create a new Jewish expression of sovereignty, of a complete and total Jewish environment, of an environment which reflects Jewish values in very subtle and very open ways all the time. Those are your 4 choices. How hard is it to make this choice? If you're in the Mizrahi world, you have no choice. You have to stay until 1948, 1950 is when they started coming. In the Eastern European world, how hard is it to make the choice? It depends. If you have the money, if you have the way, if you have family in America. Coming to America is scary, by the way. You don't speak the language. You don't know the culture. Maybe the streets are paved in gold. Probably not. What are you going to do when you get here? And getting here is scary, and being here is scary. Palestine, even more scary. How did we get to here today? Because your ancestors and my ancestors of those 4 things made a choice. Some of our ancestors chose to stay. We know what happened to them. The Jews of the East stayed in Eastern lands until 1948, 1950. Persian Jews until 1979, and then they came to America and to Israel. Jews of Western Europe who stayed, Jews of Eastern Europe who stayed, were destroyed by the Nazis. Hitler's policy was, if you had one Jewish grandparent, you were Jewish. You could be 3/4 Lutheran. There were Lutheran priests who were taken to the concentration camps because they had a Jewish grandparent. It was a genetic thing, racial thing. Western European Jewry, Eastern European Jewry was decimated by the Nazis. Staying didn't turn out to be a great idea. Changing. Well, the Bolsheviks actually did it. They overthrew the Tsar, set up the Soviet Republic, and then in 1956, Stalin turned on them. Stalin turned on them and destroyed the Jews who were in the leadership of the Bolshevik movement. And then Russian Jewish life became difficult. And then in 1989, when Russia fell, so many of those Jews ended up in Israel and in America. Those who left, we are the descendants of those who came to America and made it through the process of coming to America. And those who in Israel are the ones, well, not exactly, because only a very few went to Israel before the war. Only a very few came to Israel. What was the Jewish population of Palestine in 1948 was 600,000. So from 1890, our year, until 1948, 600,000 Jews arrived in Israel. 2.5 million went to America. Get the scale? So where did Israel come from? Well, at the end of the war, there were 1.5 million Jewish refugees left in Europe. They couldn't go home. They tried. Many of them tried. Some of them went back to their villages and towns in Poland and got slaughtered by the Polish mobs. Most of them ended up where? In what was called DP camps, displaced person camps. Why were they displaced persons? Because they didn't have a country. For one thing, some of their countries didn't exist anymore. For another thing, they never had passports. They ran, or they were in camps, and they had no papers of anything. And so the Allies gathered them up and put them in DP camps. There were millions of people in DP camps at the end of the war. Some of them were Nazi collaborators who knew that if they went back to Germany, they'd get killed. So they appealed to the Allies for asylum. Some of them were Russians and Poles, prisoners of war, and others who ended up in that mix. They were the first to be repatriated. Russians and Poles were repatriated to their countries. Nazi collaborators were either sent back to Germany or sent to America or South America. And that left Jews. So, of course, we all know what happened. Congress voted to accept all those Jews. And no, that didn't happen. Because in 1921, America closed its gates and didn't open them again for a long, long time. Even after the Holocaust, didn't open the gates again. So where did they end up? In Palestine. Who made up the bulk of the population of Israel? In 1949, refugees. And then you had refugees from the east. All those Jews from Morocco, Iraq, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya came too. And then Yemen came too. What? I know that, but that's what they came in. So everyone who's living in Israel, I'm about to make a really important point. Everyone living in Israel was a refugee from someplace that didn't want them. So when you hear people say the Palestinian struggle is a struggle to decolonialize Israel, ask them, where did they come from? The French settled Algeria. The Belgians settled Congo. The decolonial movement pushed the French out of Algeria and the Belgians out of the Congo. They went back to France and back to Belgium. Where the hell do you want us to go to? Iraq? Egypt? The Poland we came from doesn't exist anymore. It's a different country. This idea that somehow we are colonializers is a silly argument because we came from 60 different countries and we all came as refugees. And there's one interesting thing about a refugee. What's the attitude of a refugee? I have no place else to go. Grateful is the positive version of it. The more edgy version of it is, I have no place else to go. You want to throw me off this land? Where am I going to go? I have no place else to go. Right? That's the edge of that argument. Now, here's why this moment of October 7th is so painful, in case you didn't realize it yet. The two promises. What were the two promises? The first promise was the American promise of liberalism. Welcome to America. You belong. Except in the days after October 7th, all of us felt an old historical shiver of maybe we don't belong. When my friends on the Berkeley campus, when Sarah, who's a student at Berkeley, can't sit in a biology lab without the biology lab instructor hectoring her about Palestine and Palestinians, and the poor kid can't get across the Berkeley campus without getting screamed at, you start to feel, maybe? What happened to the promise of American liberalism? Where did it go? Where's the George Washington statement? That was the first reason. I don't think it destroyed the promise of American liberalism. There are some people who think so, but I don't think so. This is not 1937. I know that for sure. I can tell you why exactly. Because every morning we get a call from the watch commander at the West Valley LAPD station asking if we're okay. He now says good yontif to me. So it's good. He says, you have a good Shabbos now, Rabbi. Thank you, Sergeant Martinez. Right? No, I mean, American liberalism is not gone, but it shook. And we all know what earthquakes feel like. And you know that sense of helplessness when you're in the middle of an earthquake? It shook. And that's the reason why October 7th shook us and is still shaking us. There's that much anti-Semitism in this country. Not just anti-Semitism in this country. Here's the crazy irony. The most vicious expression of that anti-Semitism came exactly from the places that we thought were in place to protect American liberalism. The university. The university is the place where free discourse, open exchange of ideas, debate, enlightened ideas, thinking people live. And yet that's where my friend can't get across the campus without getting hectored and pelted. What happened to the American university? Where are we going to send our kids to college? And then the second place was we looked in the press, the free press. The New York Times is run by the Sulzberger family. The New York Times, you can argue. Some days they're pretty good. Some days, not so good. Why are they not? Some people think it's every day not so good. Some people think every day they're okay. NPR. But you understand that these are the places where we put America. We had faith in American liberalism because we had faith in these institutions. And these are the institutions where the betrayal felt worse. And then, of course, for those of us who've been involved in this kind of stuff, in those circles of social justice activists that we stood with, we marched for Black Lives Matter. We did. And then you have posters with hang gliders. You have any idea what that meant to us? Social justice activists? You know, we marched. Jews were at look, that one picture that all of us know, because I don't even have to tell you, I have to show it to you because you know what I'm talking about, of Heschel marching in Selma with a lei of flowers around, right next to Martin Luther King. We fought for African American civil rights. We fought for women's rights. Betty Friedan. Bella Abzug, my favorite, right? With the hat, right? Right? But this idea of we fought for feminism. We fought for LGBT rights. Harvey Milk, New York Jew, right? We fought for these causes. And then you turned on us. Either you were silent, which was bad, or you demonstrated from the river to the sea, which is vicious. So the foundations of American liberalism were shaken. Our faith in American liberalism has been shaken In a moment, I'm going to ask you what we're going to do. But in a minute. Let's turn to Israel for a minute. And what happened in Israel? What was the promise of Zionism? The promise of Zionism was that sovereignty, power, material power in the world would save us. That was the promise of Zionism. It would create a different kind of Jew. Here, it's a very deep internal fight within Israel, because that different kind of Jew, the Jew who is willing to stand up and fight. I gave you a source here, which is a very famous source. It's been quoted a lot since October 7th. It's on the first page. 1903, when the Kishinev pogrom happened, the Zionist Club of Odessa sent the young writer Chaim Nachman Bialik to Kishinev. He was in Odessa. They sent him up to Kishinev to report on it. He wrote a report. Then he wrote a poem. It's a very long poem. This is just one little section of it. It starts out, sounds just like a medieval martyrology about the martyrs of Jewish history. Arise and go now to the city of slaughter. Into its courtyard wind your way. Behold on tree, on stone, on fenced, on mural clay, the splattered blood and dried brains of the dead. Descend then to the cellars of the town where the virginal daughters of your folk were fouled. And it goes on for pages discussing the horror sexual violence of the marauding pogrom of Kishinev in 1903. That's bad. But Bialik's not done. Then Bialik turns at us. Listen to what he says. Note also, do not fail to note, in that dark corner, behind that cask, crouched husbands, bridegrooms, brothers peering from the cracks, watching the sacred bodies struggling underneath the bestial breath, stifled in filth and swallowing their blood, crushed in their shame, they saw it all. They did not stir nor move. They did not pluck their eyes out. They did not beat their brains against the wall. Perhaps each watcher had it in his heart to pray, a miracle, O Lord, and save my skin this day. How did the menfolk bear it? How did they bear this yoke? They crawled forth from their holes, fled to the house of the Lord, offered thanks to him, the benedictory word. The Kohanim sallied forth to the rabbi's house. They flitted, tell me, Rabbi, tell me, is my own wife permitted? The matter ends and nothing more, and all is as it was before. In Jewish law, if a man is a Kohen, he can only have relations with his wife. She can only have relations with him. If she ever has any kind of sexual contact with any other man, they're not permitted to touch each other. That's the halachic question the Kohanim asked. What bothers Bialik? They didn't fight back. The pogrom came and befouled and despoiled and raped the women of Kishinev, and the men didn't fight back. He said, what kind of men don't fight back? Bialik screams at these people. Something has died in the heart of the Jewish people. If you don't even have the most fundamental human instinct to save your relative, to save your wife, to save your sister, to protect your daughter, if that isn't present, then something inside of you has died. Zionism for Bialik wasn't just about saving the body of the Jewish people. It was about saving the soul of the Jewish people, because only a dead people sits and watches their daughters get raped and doesn't fight back. What was the promise of Zionism? A new Jew who was ready to fight back. What were we so proud of in June of 1967? The Jew who fought back. We all tore down the pictures we had of old Hasidic rabbis hanging in our homes, and we put up pictures of Moshe Dayan and Yitzhak Rabin, tough, badass Jews. Suddenly, in 8th grade, they stopped beating me up. Up until then, I was the Jew boy they could beat on. After June of 67, everyone was afraid of me. I loved it. Jews who fight back. That's the premise of Zionism. Wait, you all go on missions to Israel with the Federation, JNF, ADL, and the last day, where do they take you? To the army base, right? And they show you the airplane with the Jewish star on the wing. And they say, we didn't have this in 1942, we have these now. It's a little militaristic, a lot militaristic. A little disgusting, frankly, except for this. It's true. the first time in 2,000 years. The first war a Jewish army won since 160 BCE. The Maccabees won in 160 BCE, and Israel won in 1948. That's a long losing streak. That's almost as long as the Chicago Cubs. Don't tell Rabbi Leibowitz. Israel is supposed to protect us. Israel is the new Jew who can protect us. What happened? It failed. And it failed principally for the same reason it failed in 1973. Because that same new Jew got arrogant about his own power. Didn't understand the mind of the other, of the enemy. And trusted too much in his own ability. And right now, the country is going through a terrible cheshbon hanefesh, a terrible turning over of the soul, trying to figure out who we are and what we are and why we are. What we're going to do about this. My suggestion is that the reason why this crisis is so profound is that it has called into question and shaken the two promises that we relied on in the 20th century. The promise of American liberalism and the promise of Israeli sovereignty to protect us and allow us to live in this world. We are going through a cheshbon hanefesh in America, and Israel is going through a cheshbon hanefesh there. Cheshbon hanefesh means an overturning of the soul, an examination of the soul, a very careful examination of who we are and what we believe in and what matters, and how we're going to move forward, and what it means to be a Jew in the world today. These are very open questions right now that simply didn't get asked on October 6th. And other concerns on October 6th. But today, these are very open questions. We have returned to the same conversation we had together in the ghetto in 1891. Do we stay? Do we change the world? Do we run to America? Do we run to Israel? What are we? That is the question we're asking. That's why this crisis is so profound. Someday we will look back on it. Come back in 80 years, I'll tell you what happens. I really want to know the end of the story. I really want to know the end of the story. I don't know the end of the story. I didn't write an end to the lecture because I don't know the end of the story. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't think all of American Jewry is going to rise up and make Aliyah to Israel. I do think that our relationship to American democracy and liberal democracy is going to change significantly. I don't know what's going to happen in Israel. Hell, I don't know what's going to happen in Israel tomorrow morning, much less what's going to happen in 100 years. But I know that this moment is a turning point in the creation of identity, because that's what this is all about. It's identity. It's how I interpret myself and my place in the world. If I stay, if I change the world, if I run to America, if I run to Israel, I make a choice of a certain kind of identity. Interpretation of my own personal history and my destiny. And that, I think, that is what's going on right now. I'll give you one more point and then I'll take Bonnie's wonderful question. The only thing that gives me a little hope, I don't want you to leave depressed. I hate leaving people depressed. I don't want you to leave depressed. Is simply this. You ready? It's not the first time it's happened to us. In fact, if you know Jewish history, you know that we have a particular skill, a particular talent, a particular resilience to turning crisis and catastrophe into opportunities for creativity, reinvention, and reimagination. Look at all through Jewish history. We were exiled from our land in 586 BCE, went to Babylon, sat by the waters of Babylon. There we cried and there we wept for a little while. And then we sat down and wrote the Torah. And then in 70 CE, the Romans destroyed the temple again. And we cried and we wept and we tore our clothes. And then we went to Babylon, to Iraq, and we wrote the Talmud and created a whole new civilization. In the 11th century, Jews were thrown out of Spain, pushed away from Spain as Spain was being reconquered by the Christians, and we created the Zohar tradition and Rambam and the philosophical tradition. In 1492, we're thrown out of Spain, and 800 years of brilliant Spanish Jewish civilization comes to an end. We move to Tzfat and create the Kabbalah. In the late 19th century, as emancipation is failing and as the pogroms are beginning in Eastern Europe, we create Zionism, and we fashioned a state of Israel, and we came to America, and we shaped America. We have a particular skill for reinventing ourselves and reimagining our position in the world. A particular talent for this. As long as we don't end up in bitterness, in hatred, in anger, in violence, that's what we have to watch out for. So on the last page, I'm not going to read it, I'll let you read it at home. But this is the speech that Rachel Goldberg Poland, the mother of Hirsch, the kid who we've been talking about for 6 months. It's a 21-year-old kid who's now in captivity in Gaza. She gave a statement at the United Nations. Don't read it now. In fact, do this. Bring it to your Seder table and read this at your Seder table. It is a wonderful statement. And you can hear in her words, and she is of anybody a person whose soul is just on fire right now, whose soul is so drowning in grief and pain. If there's anyone in the world who has a right to say, it's over, this is the one. And yet, what does she say? I refuse to surrender to hatred. That's a brilliant summary of the Jewish approach to history. And this one, I was going to put it here, but I ran out of space at the bottom of the page. There's a beautiful saying of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the rabbi who witnessed the destruction of the temple in 70, which was the last great catastrophe of the Jewish people before the Holocaust. And he taught his students, if you're planting a tree, and someone comes running along and says, the Messiah is here, the Messiah is here. History is over. Redemption is ours. The Messiah is here. What do? Finish planting the tree. Then go see if it's true. That's my motto. We have work to do. We have children to teach, a community to gather, friends to hold, ideas to sponsor, books to read. We have much work to do to rebuild the Jewish people from this catastrophe. But still, we're going to wait. Maybe it's true. Maybe redemption is yet coming. Thanks very much. I am not an expert on Iranian missile throw weights. I am not an expert on Hezbollah, the internal politics of Hezbollah. I am not an expert, but I will try to answer any question. But I'm just going to ask you, as is our custom here at VBS, for those of you visiting, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome, and you're always welcome to come back. We have a very peculiar custom here. A question is a one-sentence interrogatory, beginning with the word what, when, why, where, and how, and ends with a question mark, and ask the speaker to say something. If you have an opinion to give about the state of Israeli politics today, about Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich, and if you have an opinion about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, if you have an opinion about the heads of Iran and Hezbollah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Go to Stephen Weistemple and tell that's wonderful. And after hours, I'm willing to listen to anybody's opinion. But for everybody sitting here, let's try to keep this tight. Bonnie, I'll repeat the question so that the people at home can watch it. You're on a game show here. Yes. That's a brilliant question. There is I'm going to answer. I know. Yes. 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 I'll tell you, again, I want you to know that's the heart of Israel. So I'm going to give you a key. You ready? There is a program in Israel called Eretz Nehederet. Eretz Nehederet is the Saturday Night Live of Israel. Okay? They publish these little vignettes. They did one the other day, which was hysterical. They took the song, We Are the World. We are the world, we are. And they rewrote it in Hebrew. And the words are, B'li ha'olam anachnu beseder, which means, to hell with the world, we're on our own now. They sing this idea, we don't need your American planes, and we don't need your British submarines, and we don't need your support at the UN, and yes. So here's what's so interesting. Let me take a minute and think about this, right? Yes, the question is, Israel seems to be very alone in the world. The cover, was it The Economist? Had a thing where it's just a flag in the wind, and it said, Israel alone. Israel seems very alone in the world. Very alone in the world. And the question is, what does that mean? There's several pieces to this. Thing number one, the idea of Israel was we didn't have to depend on the Goyim anymore. I mean, I'm sorry to use that pejorative, but the whole idea was, we spent all of these years in Europe trying to suck up to the non-Jewish world so they'd accept us. The hell with them. There's actually a wonderful, I gave you one of the readings here from Jabotinsky, who is the grandfather of revisionist Zionism. He was also, he's Benjamin Netanyahu's godfather, right? And he basically says, no more apologizing. He basically says, what is Israel about? We can be independent. We can be a nation among the nations, and we don't have to get everybody to love us anymore. The problem is the world is too interdependent. One of the things October 7th taught us is you can't live that way no more. It is an interdependent world. You understand, this is the first war fought on social media, right? This is the first war fought on social media. Part of the reason why Israel is having such a difficult time explaining itself is because everyone's watching the damn thing on their phones, right? The world is interdependent, and you can't live as if you're all by yourself in the world. You need the support, the protection. That's number one. Number two, Israel has not lost the protection and the support of most of the countries of the world. They haven't even lost the protection and support of most of the countries in the Middle East. The Saudis may say out loud how much they fight for the liberation of the Palestinians. The Saudis hate Hamas more than we do. Because Hamas is an instability. It's the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, and the Saudis have been trying to root out that kind of radical Islam for years. They're more terrified of Hamas than we are. Right? So the point here is, number one, we're not alone. We're not alone. There's an American aircraft carrier anchored off the coast of Haifa right now. Right? We had this vision that we didn't want to depend on anybody. The world doesn't work that way no more. They depend on us, we depend on them. Israel depends on the world depends on Israel. Right? The question is now, how do you do this? And at what point is enough? I mean, there's all kinds of serious questions right now. How do you fight a disymmetrical war without killing thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent civilians? How do you fight a war? The cynical work of the Hamas to put their tunnels underneath the population so that the population is between you and the defenses of Israel. It's a crazy thing. How do you do this? No one's ever done this before. America couldn't do this in Iraq, right? Americans killed a lot more civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan than Israel's killed. Oh, and by the way, if that breaks your heart, just consider that 250,000 Yemenis have been killed in the last few, and 750,000 Syrians were killed. Right? I mean, yeah, but that's a problem, right? So Bonnie, the question is, one of the things that Israel has to figure out, which is why the Eretz Nehederet skit is so funny and so tragic, as all their skits are, is Israel has to figure out now its place within the family of nations. That's exactly right. And it will have to figure out what its place is in the family of nations in exactly the same way that we have to figure out our place here in America. How much of the liberalism of the world can we trust? Can we count on? How much do we have to fight for it? How hard do we have to fight for it? At what point do we say it's not worth fighting for it anymore? I mean, these are serious kinds of questions. So I think your question is a beautiful question, and I haven't got the slightest idea what the answer is. You've never heard a rabbi say that in America, so how's that? Yeah. Please. Yeah. Pickup truck. Has to be a pickup truck, yeah. He probably has a gun in the truck. So. Yeah, some of us are experiencing the anti-Semitism, and some of us have been pretty much shielded from it. And part of it depends on where you are in the culture. Yeah, maybe we're being a little quiet. We're being self-censoring. I mean, look, I'll give you a simple example, okay? Again, I work here, and I'm part of the governance of this institution. You probably knew that. Um, how many years ago was it that you could just walk into shul? 10, 15 years ago? And then we put one guy at the door. After the thing in North Valley, I think it was 1996, we had one guy at the door. We had this really big guy, I remember, a lovely guy. He was our greeter more than our guard, right? You know how many guys I have on this campus with very large weapons? And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. Now, the fact is, they happen to be really sweet. Mario is the greatest. Robert, these are great guys. Victor, wonderful guy. And they know every nursery kid's name and their parents, and they know what they're eating for lunch, and they make a big deal about welcoming them in the morning. But you know, what does it do to an American Jewish child to have to pass a metal detector and a guard with a huge weapon on his hip every morning of nursery school? I worry about this. So this is what this environment has done to us. Yes, we live in a bubble. Well, some of us are. Yeah, most of us have sort of stepped out of the bubble now because we realize history has come back, right? History has come back. Ben-Gurion said, we have reinserted ourselves into history. Well, that comes with a vulnerability. And the vulnerability is that you now are subject to the conditions of history. And that's very scary. At the same time, we have power we never had before, right? We have power we never had before, and visibility we never had before. And we're trying to negotiate this in a very powerful way. And I don't know exactly where it's going to end up. I'm watching this. I said at the beginning, we're in the middle of this crisis. I'm very aware of the fact that the Secretary of State is the child of Holocaust survivors. The Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Attorney General are all Jews. The Vice President's husband is a Jew. The guy running against him, his children are Orthodox Jews. They're pretty visible Jews in this society, don't you think? Right? I don't know if Shohei Ohtani is Jewish. Does anybody know if he's Jewish? Shohei Ohtani? Shohei, sounds up as Jewish, right? Shalom Ohtani. But if you know him and he's Jewish, I will give him an aliyah. Michael, go ahead. And his interpreter I can't afford. Unless he wants to donate to the shul, yeah. Yeah. Are we secure here in Eretz and Sino, or do we need to move to Israel? I haven't given up on American liberalism. I haven't given up on America yet. We'll see what happens in November to both the presidency, the Congress, and state houses across the country. We'll see what happens in the courts of this country. I'm watching this very carefully because it worries me a lot. It certainly worries me a lot. I don't know. I still feel it's pretty safe here. I think that we have a place here. I've had moments when I've been shaken, and I've had moments when I was inspired. It's a Presbyterian minister who lives in the neighborhood who called me and said, where can I buy a mezuzah online? I said, what do you want a mezuzah online for? He said, I have a men's group, and my men's group heard that there are people attacking homes with mezuzahs. So we decided we want mezuzahs on our doors. If they're going to come for you, they'll have to come for us first. And then he said to me, and Rabbi, we own guns. I said, I'm not gonna endorse that. I'm not going to endorse that. But I said, I'll tell you what, I will buy you the mezuzah. You don't need the cloth, by the way, if you're not Jewish. It's cheaper. So I bought him 40 mezuzahs, and there are 40 Presbyterian Protestant families in the neighborhood who have mezuzahs. If you see mezuzahs on doors, you can wish them Shabbat Shalom, but you might want to also wish them Happy Easter. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, what does that mean? And there are expressions of both. There are expressions of real prejudice and hatred that shake my confidence, and there are expressions of solidarity and brotherhood. That's a good word, but solidarity
and togetherness that still remind me that Brandeis was right. Michael, I don't know yet. The jury's out. We'll see. November will tell us something about America, I think. I think will tell us something about America. And then after that, we'll see where that takes us. We'll see where that takes us. Yeah, please. The answer is yes. Is the anti-Semitism coming from the left or the right? Yes. It's coming from both sides, right? The Jews will not replace us people in Charlottesville. Yes, it's coming more from the left and more from the right. So, and then you get the people on the other side who look at me as an oppressive, privileged oppressor, colonialist, genocidal, killer of Palestinian babies. I happen to be one of those people that think the Palestinians need a state and need a place and their voice needs to be heard, right? But I think that has to be done through a political process of careful negotiation because I have lots and lots and lots and lots of people I love in Israel, and I don't want to turn over another state to Hamas. But that has to happen. And I wish that Israel had done that, and it hasn't done it, and maybe it will now. We'll see under Mr. Biden's leadership. He's trying to get them to do that, because if they do that, the Saudis will recognize them. And if the Saudis recognize them and the rest of the Arab world and Muslim world recognizes Israel, the game changes. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe that's not the right way. Maybe the other way, the more militant way. I don't know. But I see it on both sides, and I can't measure it. It's vociferous on both sides, and you run into it when you least expect it. So you have to be careful. Jay. Oh, I was going to talk about that. I didn't get to talk about that. Jewish kids. What is it about the Jewish kids and the anti-Israel protests? Good question. So I said to you, the betrayal of American liberalism that we're feeling, the shaking of our confidence in American liberalism, is made worse because it's coming from places we thought were the bastions of American liberalism, from the universities, from the press, from the social justice movement. But the worst way it's coming is from our own kids. Now, why is that? There's an answer. About 10 years ago, I have the article. I gave you a piece of the article here. There's a journalist, there's a writer named Peter Beinart. Don't groan. I'm not reading him as a commentator here. I'm reading him as a journalist. In 2010, he published an article in the New York Review of Books called "The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment." And he starts out with this question. Every demographic study shows that younger Jews have a weaker attachment to Israel than older Jews. All of the demographics tell us that. And he wants to know why. So he went on college campuses and asked kids why. And what kids told him was basically this. I gave you a piece of the article. It's on the last page here. Younger Jews were liberal, broadly defined. They had imbibed some of the defining values of American Jewish political culture: a belief in open debate, skepticism about military force, a commitment to human rights. And in their innocence, they did not realize that they were supposed to shed those values when it came to Israel. The only kind of Zionism they found attractive was a Zionism that recognized Palestinians as deserving of dignity and capable of peace, and were quite willing to condemn an Israeli government that did not share those beliefs. The only kind of Zionism they found attractive was the kind that American Jewish establishment had been working against. And then he says at the bottom here, right, there are a great many Jews who are Zionists, and there are a great many liberals who are Jewish. He says, but the two groups are increasingly distinct, particularly in younger generations. Fewer and fewer American Jewish liberals are Zionists, and fewer American Jewish Zionists are liberal. What he's saying is, the kids believed us. When we marched for civil rights for African Americans, when we fought for the rights of women, when we fought for gay and lesbian people, when we fought against all of the prejudices that stained America, they learned that. When we said that military solutions to political problems are counterproductive and futile and destructive. They learned that. Right? Then they look at Israel and they see examples of Israel behaving in ways that are contrary to those values. And we did not, and I'm counting myself in this because I'm an educator and responsible as well, we did not do a good enough job in connecting those kids with those in Israel whose values mirror their values. And so they turn against us. They turn against us, right? So now the question is, can you get them back? And the answer is yes. And the way that you get them back is by showing them examples of Israeli democracy that reflect their values. And they're fighting the people in Israeli political society who are consonant with those values. That is the mistake that the community made. Okay? And this is a serious issue. And it's what happens is it was like not bad enough that you're getting it from universities and the press and social justice movements. You're getting it from your own kids at the Seder table. Right? So what you do is you say to the kid, let's find somebody in Israel who you agree with. And there are. There's a tremendous expression of those values in Israel today. Tremendous expression. One of the things you've got to remember that American Jews don't know, again, because we don't read Israeli newspapers and we don't listen to Israeli radio and we don't participate in Israeli political debate directly, is that the political spectrum in Israel is much wider about Israel than the political spectrum in America about Israel. And there are opinions that Israelis tolerate that American Jews wouldn't tolerate if someone here said it. Right? David Grossman, who's a great novelist, is a ridiculous leftist. And if he came to America and you didn't know who he was, and I just introduced him as Professor David Grossman, you'd say, oh, he's an anti-Semite. But in Israel, he's welcome because he lost a kid in the last war. Because he's deeply in love with Israel, but he's in love with it. And so he writes an article in the New York Times where he says Israel's falling off an abyss. It's an amazing article. You go look that up. I was going to give you that one too, but enough is enough, right? So I think that it's really important to not condemn them and push them away, which is what many Jews want to do. You're an anti-Semite, get out of my house. Talk to them. Listen to their values. Ask them what they believe in deepest. What Israel would they like to see? My teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, my great teacher, used to say, the great question isn't is, but ought. It's not what Israel is, but what Israel ought to be. And ask those kids, what Israel would you like to see? What Israel would you like to fight for? Because Israel is a visible, tangible, palpable, powerful reflection of us at this moment in our history. So all of us have a stake in the Israel that ought to be. And I think that kids can affiliate with those things and feel very much attached. Yes, please. I don't know. Why can't Israel do a better PR job? Right? This is one of the great ironies of Middle Eastern Jewish history, right? Jews are good at talking and Arabs are good at fighting. Now we're good at fighting and they're good at talking. I don't understand why. Part of the reason is because of that same quality of sort of, and I don't mean to be insulting to anybody here, God forbid, or even in Israel, but there's a certain arrogance. How many times have Israeli leaders come here and told me what American Jews should be thinking? Instead of asking me, what are American Jews thinking? Right? I have, and so and why can't I go to Israel and listen to them? And why can't we're not good at listening. There's a reason why God told us Shema Yisrael. That's our biggest commandment. You know why? Because we're not good at it. We're good at talking. We're really good at talking, as you could tell. But we're not really good at listening. So God made it a commandment. Shema Yisrael. Shut up, Jews, and listen to each other. If American Jews were able to hear Israelis, that's one of the reasons we had the last 3 sessions. You would understand why this has touched their hearts so deeply. And if Israeli Jews were able to hear us, they would have a better strategy for how to talk to our children. And that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're hoping. That's what ought to be. That's what ought to be. Is it late? I hear someone's phone ringing, which means it's ice cream time. It is late. Okay. What time does Menchie's close? Is it 10? We have. Go ahead. please. Yeah, 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 yeah. I wish. Yeah. So the question is, why is Israel held to a moral standard that's so different from the moral standard any other country is held to? You know, and what can we do about it? Some years ago, we had a program for our benefactors here at the shul, and we invited the fellow who was the editorial page editor of the Los Angeles Times. I forgot his Norman. Anyways, a lovely guy, and I got to interview him, and I got to ask him that question. I said, given the page, you have one page, an editorial page, LA Times, right? And you have an opinion page. And Israel has a real big presence on that page. And I've noticed an awful lot of criticism. This was before October 7th, an awful lot of criticism of Israel. And I said, how do you justify that? How do you justify that? And he said something interesting. I mean, he said to me something that I never thought anybody would actually admit out loud. He said, I said, like, why don't you criticize like the other side, And he simply said, well, because we have a bigger stake in Israel than we did in any other place, and we expect more of Israel. I said, you really do have a double standard. He said, I guess we do. And I said, that's kind of hateful, isn't it? I mean, from a newspaper like yours, a major metropolitan newspaper. And he said, no, it's actually a compliment to Israel. I said, could you compliment somebody else? I mean, it was an interesting admission from the guy, because I didn't think he would admit it, but he admitted it like straight out. And he said, I'm a Jew. He's Jewish, I'm Jew, and I expect more of Israel. And I said, but you're the editor of this huge newspaper that, believe it or not only Jews read. It was such an interesting admission. Yes, I listen to NPR, and I like, hello? I don't know what you can write angry. I know lots of people that have canceled their subscriptions and written angry letters, and I think the better thing to do, you can do this. This is part of, this is why I have no hair left. The better thing to do is to try to understand for yourself and to try to speak this truth to, the people that we speak to. I don't know how you change that media, because it's about media and what catches eyes and what, why is there starvation in Gaza? It's not because the Israelis aren't letting aid in. It's because Hamas has stolen all the aid. We know this because we've seen it in the marketplaces. And so this is stuff going on. So, and you have a terrorist organization that has embedded itself beneath a civilian population. The World Health Organization condemned Israel for attacking the Shifa hospital again. Yeah, because there were 700 terrorists in the hospital. Come on. At what point do you say it's enough already? But you have to get used to it after a while. I'm venting because you're listening to me, and no one ever listens to me, Iris. I just want to thank you. My wife doesn't want to hear it anymore. My kids don't want to hear it. The congregation doesn't want to hear it. You're shaking your head. Thank God. It's the only person who wants to listen. So stay here a while because I need this. It's so much better for my therapy. All right, we're going to have to call this to a close. You want to say one quick thing? A question? Yeah. Yeah. Tell them, like, you know what you say to them? What do you want? And they're going to say, we want a ceasefire now. You say, good. Is Hamas prepared to let go of all 136 hostages? If Hamas were to let go of all 136 hostages tomorrow, the war would end 30 minutes later. Oh, gosh, yes. If Hamas would let go of all the hostages, no, not one at a time, not two at a time, not in trade for 50,000 killers. Yes, but first, if they'll let go of the hostages, support for the war in Israel would drop precipitously and the war would end. And then Hamas would crawl out of their hole. They'd crawl out of their hole into a wasteland of Gaza. Well, okay, fine. So that's you asked me my opinion. I told you my opinion. See? I love it when people have opinions. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a moment of crisis. Take care of each other. And if it's not anomalous to say this, have a happy, sweet Pesach. The problem they have is that Hezbollah is much more powerful than Hamas. And, I don't know whether Israel's going to have the support